haunted hotel wasn't supposed to be here. Halloween night, a time when I'd normally be with friends or at home, was instead spent in this run-down hotel off a forgotten highway. The plan had been simple: drive through the night and find somewhere to crash. But my car had other ideas, breaking down just miles from this decaying relic of a hotel. A flickering neon sign, the Old Oak Inn, cast long, distorted shadows across the cracked pavement, and I had no other choice but to walk in. The receptionist didn't look up as I approached the front desk. His sunken eyes were fixed on an old black-and-white TV set, the volume barely audible. The lobby smelled of mildew and rot, like it hadn't seen a living soul in years. I tapped the bell. Asterisk ding. Asterisk. He turned slowly, his face pale and gaunt, like he hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. No smile, no greeting. He handed me a tarnished key without a word, room 213 etched faintly on the metal tag. I paid in cash, and he slid it into the drawer with a nod. The hallway to my room was dimly lit, the sconces casting strange, wavering shadows along the faded wallpaper. The carpet was threadbare, and every step I took seemed to echo far louder than it should have. A sudden draft sent a chill down my spine, but I shook it off as just nerves. I found room 213 at the end of the hall. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open. Inside, the room was sparse. An old bed with stained sheets, a crooked dresser, and a single window overlooking nothing but darkness. It was as depressing as I expected, but it would do for the night. I threw my bag on the bed, exhausted, and flopped down next to it. The wind howled outside, making the window rattle. I pulled out my phone, no signal. Great. But as soon as I lay back to rest, I heard something, a faint scratching sound. I sat up listening. It was coming from behind the dresser. I stood up and cautiously approached. As I reached for the handle to pull it away from the wall, the scratching stopped. Silence. Maybe it was just rats. I laughed to myself, shaking off the unease, and turned back toward the bed. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure in the mirror. Standing just behind me, my breath caught in my throat as I spun around. Nothing. There was no one there. I stared into the mirror, heart racing, but it reflected only my pale, wide-eyed face and the empty room behind me. Shaken, I quickly drew the curtains shut, cutting off the reflection, and sank onto the bed. I told myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me. But the air in the room felt heavier now, pressing down on me. The walls seemed closer, almost suffocating. I lay back, closing my eyes, willing myself to sleep. Then the whispering started. It was faint at first, just a soft hiss from somewhere in the room. I bolted upright, scanning every corner. But the whispering grew louder, coming from all directions. Soft, unintelligible words, voices blending together in a chorus of dread. I stood up, panic rising in my chest, and flung open the door. The hallway outside was pitch black, far darker than before. My breath quickened as I stepped out, the air cold and stale. Then, from the shadows at the end of the hall, something moved. A figure, tall and gaunt, lurched forward from the darkness. Its face was hidden, shrouded in shadow, but its eyes, those cold, dead eyes, locked onto mine. My stomach dropped. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by terror. The figure stepped closer, dragging something behind it. A scraping, metallic sound echoed through the hall, sending a wave of nausea through me. Closer and closer it came until it stopped just a few feet away. I could see its skeletal fingers wrapped tightly around a rusted knife. I stumbled back, slamming the door behind me, my heart hammering in my chest. But when I turned around, I froze. The bed, where I had been lying just moments ago, was soaked in blood. I hadn't seen it before, but now it was unmistakable. Thick, dark, and fresh. The sheets were drenched, the mattress sunken in as if something or someone had bled out right there. The whispering grew louder, the words clearer now, voices chanting something I couldn't understand. Panicking, I grabbed the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. I yanked it harder, but it was as if the entire hotel was holding me captive. My heart pounded as the shadows in the room began to twist and writhe, shapes forming and dissipating as if alive. Then a loud knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks came from behind me. I spun around, my blood running cold. The closet door, which I hadn't noticed before, was ajar. From the dark crack between the doors, something moved. I couldn't breathe. Another knock. This time, from inside the closet. The door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. But I knew something was there, waiting for me. And then, the voice whispered from the darkness, clear as day. You shouldn't have come here. Part 2. The Haunted Hotel. The voice was close, too close. It reverberated in my ears, sending a shiver down my spine. My throat tightened and my chest ached with the force of my heartbeat. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to leave, to run and never look back, but the door was still locked, trapping me in this nightmare. I turned toward the closet, its dark, yawning mouth open wider than before. I couldn't see anything inside, but I felt something staring back at me, something waiting in the shadows. My breath caught as I stepped backward, putting as much distance between myself and the closet as the small room would allow. The whispering had stopped, leaving an oppressive silence that made my ears ring. I didn't dare take my eyes off the closet. My mind raced, searching for any rational explanation, but deep down, I knew there wasn't one. This place, it wasn't normal. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. I could see my breath fogging in the dim light. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch, elongating like creeping fingers. I backed up against the door, gripping the handle so tightly that my knuckles turned white. It still wouldn't move. The cold metal felt like ice beneath my fingers. Then, the bed creaked. My eyes darted to the corner of the room where the blood-stained mattress sagged under an invisible weight. Something was pressing down on it, an imprint slowly forming, as if a body was lying there, even though nothing was visible. The sheets, already soaked in crimson, shifted slightly, as if something or someone was moving beneath them. I couldn't tear my gaze away as the imprint grew deeper. I could hear it now, faint, shallow breaths. The bed groaned louder, as though it could barely contain whatever horror was resting upon it. Suddenly, the blankets flew off, revealing the full horror beneath. The bed was no longer empty. A body, pale, bloated, and twisted, lay sprawled across the mattress. Its face was contorted in agony, mouth frozen in a silent scream. Its eyes were wide open, glassy, and locked directly on me. My stomach lurched. I stumbled back, slamming against the wall. The grotesque figure on the bed twitched, its fingers curling inward like claws. Then, slowly, painfully, its head turned. The sound of bones cracking echoed in the room, making my skin crawl. The corpse's eyes, lifeless and milky, never left mine as its neck twisted further than any human neck should, until its head was almost completely backward. The sound of the bones snapping and the flesh stretching was unbearable, but I couldn't look away. My breath was coming in shallow, panicked bursts. Suddenly, it sat up. I gasped, my hands fumbling for the door handle again. The figure on the bed moved with a sickening slowness, its joints popping and groaning as it dragged itself upright. The air was thick with the stench of rot and decay. The whispering returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices all around me. The shadows danced along the walls, swirling and coiling as if they were alive, feeding off my terror. The thing on the bed rose to its feet, its limbs jerking unnaturally, moving closer to me. I could hear the soft squelching of blood-soaked fabric against the floor, could feel the cold radiating off its body as it approached. My mind was screaming for me to do something, anything, but I was frozen in place, pinned by its gaze. The thing reached out, its hand hovering just inches from my face. The smell of death was overwhelming. Then, in one swift motion, it grabbed my wrist. Its grip was cold like ice. I yelped in pain as its long, bony fingers dug into my skin. I tried to pull away, but its strength was inhuman. My wrist burned under the pressure, and I could feel the bones creaking. My vision blurred with panic as I struggled to break free, but it only tightened its hold. And then I saw them. The faces. Dozens of faces, pale and distorted, began to emerge from the shadows on the walls. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, their mouths twisted in grotesque, silent screams. They moved toward me, crawling out of the darkness, their whispers filling my ears. "Join us! Join us! Join us!" I thrashed against the corpse's grip, desperately trying to shake it off. My heart pounded in my chest, a cold sweat dripping down my back. I felt its icy breath on my neck as it leaned in closer. Its lips curled into a sickening grin, revealing rows of jagged, broken teeth. "Welcome," it rasped, its voice low and guttural. "You'll never leave." At that moment, the closet door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound was like a gunshot, reverberating through the room. The shadows on the walls swirled violently, the faces contorting into hideous shapes, and the air became thick with malice. The lights flickered wildly, plunging the room into near darkness. My pulse quickened as I fought to free myself, my skin crawling with the sensation of unseen hands grabbing at me, pulling me deeper into the nightmare. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The lights flickered back on, and the room was empty. No corpse, no faces, no voices. Just me, alone, standing in the middle of the cold, silent room. The bed was untouched, no blood, no sign of anything amiss. I stumbled back, my heart still racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My wrist ached, and I glanced down to see bruises forming where the thing had grabbed me. My mind reeled. Had it all been real? I reached for the door again, and this time it opened. Without hesitation, I bolted out into the hallway. The oppressive darkness was gone, replaced by the faint flickering light from the sconces. I hurried down the hall, not daring to look back. But as I turned the corner, something caught my eye. A small, framed photograph hung crookedly on the wall. I froze. It was me. The photograph was of me standing in the lobby holding the room key. My heart stopped as I stared at the image, my mind racing. That picture hadn't been there before. I would have seen it when I checked in. And then I noticed something else. In the background of the photograph, barely visible, was a shadow. A tall, gaunt figure standing just behind me. Its eyes locked onto mine. I ran. I didn't stop running. My footsteps echoed off the walls of the narrow hallway, the sound bouncing back at me, urging me to go faster. The weight of the photograph burned in my mind. The figure, the shadow, the way its eyes had fixed on me like it was waiting, watching. I reached the lobby, breathless and drenched in sweat. The old TV still flickered, casting a sickly glow over the room, but the receptionist was gone. The entire place felt abandoned, as if I'd never seen anyone there in the first place. The front door was just ahead, a beacon of escape, but something in the pit of my stomach told me it wouldn't be that easy. I didn't care. I had to try. I grabbed the handle and pulled. Locked. Of course! I yanked it harder, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the door, hoping for some miracle that would set me free. The glass was cold, unyielding, and the lobby felt more suffocating by the second. My reflection stared back at me from the door, but there was something off about it. My eyes looked darker, more hollow, as though something had drained the life out of me in the last few minutes. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, plunging the lobby into near darkness. The shadows twisted and stretched, the air thickening with that same icy dread I had felt in the room. My heart pounded in my chest, the adrenaline surging through my veins. I turned, scanning the dim space for any sign of movement. And then I saw it. Standing at the far end of the lobby, just beyond the reception desk, was the figure, the one from the photograph. It stood deathly still, its tall, gaunt form draped in shadow, its hollow eyes fixed on me once more. A low, raspy breath filled the air, even though the figure didn't move. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. My mind raced with fear, my body trembling with the overwhelming urge to flee, but there was nowhere to go. I was trapped, alone, and that thing, whatever it was watching me dot. It took a step forward. I felt my stomach drop as its bare foot dragged along the floor, a slow, scraping sound that made my skin crawl. I backed away, instinctively reaching for something, anything, to defend myself, but there was nothing. Just that eerie TV flicker and the cold darkness that was closing in on me dot another step. And then another. Each one slow, deliberate, like it was savoring every second of my terror. "Get away from me!" I screamed, my voice cracking, but it didn't stop. It never did. Suddenly, the TV blared to life, louder than before. Static filled the room, and my eyes shot to the screen. Through the chaotic black and white noise, an image flickered, distorted at first, but then it cleared just enough to make out a face. Asterisk, asterisk, my face. Asterisk, asterisk. I stood frozen as the image on the screen showed me sitting in the lobby, just as I was now, wide-eyed and terrified. But something was wrong. The version of me on the TV wasn't alone. In the image standing behind me was the figure. Its bony hand was resting on my shoulder, and its hollow eyes stared into the camera, a crooked grin slowly spreading across its face. I spun around, but nothing was there. The figure on the TV leaned closer to me, whispering something into my ear. I couldn't make out the words, but the look of terror on my own face, the one on the screen, was unmistakable. I backed away from the TV, my chest tight with fear. The figure's face twisted into something grotesque as it leaned in closer, its breath fogging the glass of the TV screen. And then the whispering started again, this time louder, from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. The voices grew, rising into a chorus of unintelligible, desperate cries, each one more panicked than the last. My ears rang with the sound, my head pounding. I covered my ears, trying to block it out, but the voices only grew louder, angrier. Suddenly, the front desk bell asterisk dinged. Asterisk. My heart lurched. Slowly, I turned toward the desk. The receptionist was back, standing completely still behind the counter. His eyes were wide, vacant, his lips parted in an unnatural grin. But something was wrong. His body didn't seem right. His neck was twisted at an impossible angle, his head slumped to one side. His clothes were soaked, dark stains spreading across his chest as if he had bled out. A soft, gurgling sound escaped his throat as his eyes rolled back in his head. Then, without warning, his body jerked forward, collapsing onto the counter with a wet thud. His hand, limp and lifeless, stretched out toward the bell. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. I needed to get out. The bell rang again. This time, from behind me, I spun around, and there it was. The figure standing just inches away from me, its cold breath washing over my face. Its eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to stretch endlessly into oblivion. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but stare into those voids. It reached out a long, bony hand and pressed its fingers against my chest. The coldness seeped through my skin, freezing me to my core. I gasped as it leaned in closer, its mouth opening to speak. But before it could, the lights went out. Everything was swallowed by darkness. The silence was deafening, my own heartbeat the only sound in the thick, oppressive black. I felt the figure's presence still close, its breath on my neck, but I couldn't see anything. Then, out of the blackness, a sharp, agonized scream erupted. It wasn't mine. The lights flickered back on and the figure was gone. I was alone in the lobby. The dead receptionist slumped over the desk, the TV off. My chest heaved with panicked breaths, my legs trembling beneath me. I turned to the door once more, and it was wide open. Without thinking, I bolted through it out into the cold night air. The hotel loomed behind me like a monstrous shadow, its windows dark and hollow. My car was just where I had left it, and I rushed toward it, fumbling for the keys. But as I reached the driver's side, I stopped cold. There, sitting in the passenger seat, was a photograph. The same photograph from inside the hotel, only this time it was different. In the image, I was standing at the front door just as I had been moments ago. But behind me, through the open door of the hotel, the figure stood. Its skeletal hand was resting on my shoulder, its empty eyes locked onto mine. My blood ran cold. And beneath the photograph, in shaky, smudged handwriting, were the words, "You can't leave." I stood frozen, staring at the photograph. My pulse pounded in my ears, my heart hammering as I processed the words. Asterisk, asterisk, you can't leave. Asterisk, asterisk. The shadowy figure, always lurking, always watching, was still with me, somehow tied to me in a way I couldn't explain. But I couldn't let it win. I asterisk would asterisk leave. I asterisk had asterisk too. Shaking, I ripped the photograph in half, tossing the pieces to the ground. My hands fumbled as I jammed the key into the car's ignition. The engine sputtered for a moment and my heart sank. For a second, I thought the car wouldn't start, like the hotel itself was keeping me trapped. But then, the engine roared to life. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The headlights flared on, cutting through the fog that clung to the night air. The hotel, with its dark windows and eerie silence, seemed smaller now, less threatening in the glare of the lights. I floored the gas pedal, peeling out of the parking lot, my tires squealing against the asphalt. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me. No figure, no shadows, no twisted faces lurking in the distance. The hotel shrank as I sped away, disappearing into the blackness of the night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me. The road stretched out before me, long and empty. The wind howled through the cracks in the car's windows, carrying with it the faintest whisper of that cursed place. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing myself to focus on the road. "You're out! You made it!" I told myself, trying to calm my racing thoughts. But just as I began to breathe easier, my headlights caught something up ahead. Something standing in the middle of the road. My stomach flipped. It was the figure. The same gaunt, hollow-eyed figure standing in the center of the road, staring straight at me. My heart pounded in my chest as I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the car skidded to a stop just inches away from the figure. It didn't move. I sat there, paralyzed with fear, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The figure remained still, its dead eyes fixed on mine through the windshield. It was as if time itself had frozen, trapping me in this moment, refusing to let me go. But then, something strange happened. The figure began to change. Its form flickered, shifting and distorting in the light of the headlights. The once terrifying skeletal shape softened, the shadows melting away. I blinked, unsure if I was imagining it, but the figure was no longer the same. It was asterisk human. Asterisk. A man, an old frail man, his body hunched with age, stood where the figure had been. His eyes were no longer hollow pits of darkness, but filled with sadness, regret. He raised a hand, not to threaten me, but in a gesture of peace. I stared at him, confused. Was this the same entity that had been haunting me? The same thing that had chased me through that cursed hotel? The man's lips moved, and though I couldn't hear the words, I understood. Help me! He wasn't a monster. He was trapped, just like I had been. A soul bound to that awful place, forced to haunt it for years, maybe decades, without escape. And now somehow I was the key to setting him free. I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel, unsure of what to do. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to drive far away and never look back, but I couldn't. Not now. Not when I understood the truth. I slowly opened the car door and stepped out, the cold night air hitting me like a wall. The man stood still, watching me, waiting. I approached cautiously, my heart still racing, but the fear that had gripped me before was gone. "I don't know how to help you," I said, my voice barely a whisper, the wind threatening to carry it away. The man's eyes softened, and he reached into his coat, pulling out something small, a pendant, tarnished with age. He held it out to me, and I hesitated for a moment before taking it. The metal felt cold in my hand, but there was something else, something warm, something alive that pulsed through it. "Take it back," he said, his voice faint but clear. "Back to where it belongs, the hotel." He wanted me to return it to the hotel. I nodded, understanding that this was his tether, the thing keeping him bound to that cursed place. It had been lost, forgotten, and now it was my job to set it right. I couldn't explain why, but I knew that once I returned it, he would finally be free. I climbed back into my car, gripping the pendant tightly in my hand. The man stepped aside, no longer a figure of terror, but of peace. As I drove back toward the hotel, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The fear, the dread, it was all fading away, replaced by something lighter, something hopeful. The hotel loomed ahead, its dark silhouette against the night sky. I pulled into the parking lot, but this time there was no sense of dread. The air felt different, lighter, as if the place itself knew what was about to happen. I stepped out of the car and approached the front door. The pendant in my hand felt warmer now, almost humming with energy. I pushed open the door and the lobby greeted me with silence. The shadows that had once twisted and writhed were gone, and the oppressive weight that had hung in the air had lifted. I walked to the reception desk, the pendant heavy in my hand. Without thinking, I placed it on the counter right in the center. As soon as it touched the surface, the lights in the hotel flickered once more. But this time it wasn't frightening. It was a release. The air around me seemed to sigh, as if the building itself was letting go of something old, something dark. The pendant glowed softly for a moment before dimming, its purpose fulfilled. And then the figure appeared one last time, no longer twisted or terrifying, but the man I had seen on the road. He smiled, a soft, grateful smile, and then, with a final nod, he faded into the air, disappearing into the night. I stood there for a moment, stunned, before stepping back outside. The stars overhead were bright, the wind gentle, and for the first time since I had arrived, I felt free. As I drove away, the hotel disappeared into the distance, and I knew both of us were finally free.